Thank you, Senator, and thank both of you for your testimony on how we can better crack down on transnational gang violence. Some of us have been at this issue for a very long time. About 20 years ago, I formed a regional anti-gang task force with Congressman Frank Wolf from Virginia at the time to crack down on Central American gangs, primarily MS-13. But it does make it more difficult for us to crack down on gangs like MS-13 when leaders in their home countries are actually working against us. And that includes President Bukele in El Salvador. In 2020, the Salvadorian news outlet El Faro reported that Bukele's officials secured deals with MS-13 to reduce homicides, but in exchange for prison privileges and political support. Dr. Felbob, is it true that in December 2021, the U.S. Department of Treasury validated this report by imposing global Magnitsky sanctions on 2 senior Bukele officials for their roles in making these deals?
I saw the indictment, yes.
Right. And beyond that, and additional evidence came to light. In 2023, there was a DOJ indictment that revealed that Bukele's government helped an MS-13 gang leader known as Crook avoid extradition to the United States. Bukele officials even set him up in a luxury apartment and assisted in his escape out of El Salvador. Do you remember those reports?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And would you agree, Doctor, that blocking extraditions to the United States and aiding fugitives makes President Bukele often an unreliable partner when it comes to fighting transnational crime?
Certainly, if negotiations with criminal groups lead to political advantages, if they enable corruption, if they operate outside of the rule of law, and if they prevent disclosure of significant compromising evidence, this is very concerning as to what kind of partner such an individual, in this case President of El Salvador, could be in combating organized crime groups.
Well, I want to pick up on what you just said about preventing the disclosure of very important information to hold criminals accountable. Because when President Trump came to office his second time around, he made a deal with President Bukele, where President Bukele agreed to imprison in CECOT, a notorious prison, people who were taken from the United States in violation of their due process rights. Less attention has been paid to what President Bukele got in exchange. What he got in exchange was that President Trump ordered federal prosecutors to drop charges that were pending against MS-13 people who were in United States custody, had been charged with crimes. They were in U.S. custody. They were awaiting trial in the United States. And instead of having them stand trial and have information come out at that trial about the collusion between MS-13 and President Bukele, President Trump sent them back to El Salvador. Isn't that right?
Yes, my understanding from reporting by New York Times and other outlets is that this is indeed what has been part of the deal. And certainly the lack of disclosure that the charged individuals would provide in cooperating with U.S. law enforcement authorities or in U.S. courts is, in my view, significant blow to countering organized crime groups and, crucially, to countering the political collusion that enables it in a fundamental way.
Now, I agree with you 100%. I think it sends a very dangerous message to U.S. law enforcement that when they're in the middle of making a case against MS-13 gang members here in the United States, rather than take them to trial and get that testimony and evidence, they get sent back to El Salvador where they're effectively silenced. That testimony doesn't come to light. We've seen El Faro, one of the newspapers in El Salvador that has brought these things to light, being heavily persecuted by Bukele's government, all sorts of harassment. We just, within the last few weeks, saw Cristosal, which is a very important human rights organization in El Salvador, leave El Salvador because of their fear of retaliation by Bukele for their anti-corruption reporting. If you could just close where you began, really, which is saying that when you have this corruption, it does undermine our efforts to combat gang violence and puts more Americans at risk.
Absolutely. Anti-organized crime activities are fundamental to the health and well-being of society, but they need to take place within the rule of law. All too often, anti-crime campaigns become mechanisms of political repression that targets any kind of opponents. And for anti-crime efforts to be effective, they need to be strictly consistent with human rights, laws, civil rights, and they need to foster civil society, openness, investigative journalism, and oversight by groups such as NGOs.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you both. Thank you, Senator.